November Park and Recreation Commission meeting. Did want to note for the purposes of this meeting, so far we have not met the required number of commissioners in person for quorum, which means we will not be able to take any action until we have that quorum number for items such as the adoption of the meeting minutes that may need to move to December if we do not have that, or any other actionable items. But we can still meet as a commission and hear discussions and things like that. So what I'll do is I'll go through the introduction first. Again, welcome to the November meeting. My name is Marco Rivero. I am the staff liaison to the PRC. I would like to remind our attendees that the PRC meeting will be recorded. We ask that presenters and attendees please mute your microphones if you're not speaking. During hybrid meetings, commissioners joining virtually and who are eligible to vote must have their cameras on for the duration of the meeting for the purposes of meeting quorum. For those attending via telephone, you can mute and unmute your microphones by dialing *6. The chat box will be monitored to address any technical or procedural questions during the meeting, but should not be used for meeting discussion. Commissioners should use the raise your hand function on the top toolbar to be recognized during the commission's discussion. And assigned presenters may share their screens using the share content box. As way of information, we will be holding a public comment period. In order to be recognized, please use the raise your hand function, and each public commenter will have up to 3 minutes for that comment. Staff will signal to the speaker once time is up. During the public comment period and during the agenda item discussions amongst the PRC, the chair will recognize virtual participation first, and then in-person attendees will be able to comment. So again, thank you very much for attending, and I'll turn it over to our chair.
Hello, welcome everybody. The meeting is now called to order. Thank you, Marco, for the introduction. The first item on our agenda is public comment, but I don't think we have any, do we?
We do not.
Okay. Ordinarily, we would take up approving the minutes, but since we don't have a quorum, we're going to skip that. And we'll go straight to our first item, which is Gateway Park. So we have staff members here to talk about it. We have Max Ewart and Jeremy Smith. And then online we have Justin
Jackson.
Jack.
I'm Justin with Field Operations. Hi, everyone. My name is Max Ewart. I'm an associate planner with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and myself, along with Jeremy Smith, have been the project managers for the Gateway Park project last year.
Time out. Can the people on the phone and on the internet hear Max okay?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for confirming. And we're the past year plus, we've been going through this process for the Gateway Park Master Plan and Design Guidelines, and we are approaching the end of it. And we wanted to get some feedback from the Park and Rec Commission before we took it over the finish line. So I have a presentation for you all today. Hopping into the agenda, we're going to go over a couple things: the existing conditions for the project, the engagement process, and then finally the Park Master Plan and Design Guidelines. For the existing conditions, Gateway Park here as it exists today, it's important to kind of have an understanding of who, like what's going on around Gateway Park. First question that we kind of think of when we're taking into analysis of the Gateway Park is looking at who lives near Gateway Park, and looking at the 4 civic associations that surround Gateway Park. North Roslyn, North Highlands, Colonial Village, and Radnor, Fort Myers Heights. You can kind of get a demographic breakdown, and a couple of things that were really stood out to us that we kind of took into consideration as we were going through this whole process is that it's a pretty young like part of the county. Over 50% is between the age of 25 to 44, and then you have an additional about 25% that are younger than that. So almost 3/4 of folks who live in this area are at the age of 45. That indicates that it's a lot of kind of established families or younger families that may be having children in the future, rather than predominantly the population. There's a lot of households in this area, predominantly in the kind of like rapidly rising number of condos that are coming up in the um, kind of like downtown Roslyn area. And then you have like more of like a single family homes that are kind of surrounding it. Onto the next slide, we also like to take a look at like what is near Gateway Park. What event spaces are nearby, gardens and natural habitats, different art installations, dog-friendly parks. We know that we have the temporary dog space that currently exists in Gateway Park, and it's important to kind of take a look at what's around to identify why that space is so badly needed. On this map, you can see within the half-mile radius, which is the inner circle, you can see 2 other dog-friendly parks, but those are associated directly with private developments. Those are not like super publicly accessible spaces that are like dedicated dog runs or dog parks. We have a couple playgrounds, and then we have some sports courts and fields that are nearby. And we're including in this some parks to be in the top right-hand corner on the Arlington side of the river. You have a bright blue circle that's going to be the future boathouse site. So yes, we're looking at this as an existing conditions, but it's important to consider. We know this is going to be coming down the line, and it's part of the analysis as well.
What's the dot next to the boathouse? Sorry.
The dot next to the boathouse, gardens and natural habitats.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's.
That's along the Mount Vernon Trail.
Gotcha.
There's a
It's a
garden
park.
area.
The well-known garden that's in the travel lanes of the GW.
Moving on to the next slide, we also like to take into consideration what's in Gateway Park. The different amenities that exist today. We have the terrace lawns. We have former fountains, not really functioning as fountains anymore. We have a shaded terrace area, public restrooms, plaza. We have a memorial space, the interim dog park, as mentioned earlier, and then kind of a sand pit play area. I think what this diagram does a really good job of showing is that a lot of the park is concrete. The pink areas are where people recreate, but even if you include some of these, you have a lot of concrete areas. Some of the darker grays are planting spaces, but those are usable for recreation purposes. But they are green, and we'll get into this a little bit later. But it's what exists today is very, very concrete heavy, and it played into our kind of analysis of what should be in this future park. We also
When was it created, the current version?
1984. Yeah. We also took a look at what happens at Gateway Park. Well, a lot of what is going on today at Gateway Park is through special events. A lot of them done through the Roslyn bid. That includes big ones like the Jazz Fest, which sees up to almost 9,000 people over the weekend. The Roslyn Cinema summer movies at the park. You have the Fall Fest, Roslyn Live, Halloween at the Prairie Dog Space. And then smaller events like the boot camps with Coach Vic that bring folks on the weekend to kind of work out and use that lawn terrace area. But what this really shows is that the predominant users of the park right now are through these special events that we have throughout the year. And then you have kind of individual stakeholder groups that are the everyday users, but it's not the predominant use of the park is to have that everyday use. We have a diagram here showing kind of like Jazz Fest at capacity as it exists today, how people kind of experience the park during that special event. So that takes us into the community engagement for the park. The first engagement, we asked kind of very broad visioning based questions. How do folks get to the park? What do they do when they get there? When you think of the park, what do you love? What would you like to transform and stuff like that? During the first engagement, we had over 700 participants, about 300 in person over the open house, and then various pop-up events and targeted engagements, and then about 400 of those were folks who participated online. For those in-person events, we did the open house, like I mentioned, at HP Woodlawn, and then a couple pop-up events at the farmers market, and then a targeted engagement with students at HP Woodlawn. During the engagement, we noticed that there was a little bit of a hole age-wise of who has been participating in this. no one under the age of 19. And so we figured, since we are planning for a park in a community where 25% of the population is under the age of 25, we wanted to be a little bit more intentional about who we were reaching out to during that engagement process to make sure that children's voices were being heard in some way, shape, or
Is HB Woodlawn in walking distance or not quite?
it is in walking
is.
distance. It's like about, it's in between the 5 and 10 minute walk kind of. Yes. So jumping into that first engagement, like I mentioned, we asked these kind of high level visioning questions. How do people get to the park? What we've found out is that the predominant amount of people are coming from the west. They are coming from the north and southwest, entering the park through Nash Street, or they're coming across the Key Bridge, or directly from the south. Over 64% of the folks who attend the park, and this was during the in-person engagement, indicated that they walk there. 23% bike. So the vast majority of the people who are getting to this park are not doing so from private car access, and we wanted to make sure that reflected in the design that we were building. Another question that we asked is what themes folks felt would attract them to the park. During the engagement, this is also from the in-person, the predominant themes that folks really liked were nature, biodiversity, and then community events. And I think that reflected very highly on kind of how the park is used today, and a little bit of like hope about what the park could do in the future. We also asked folks to imagine the future by putting images of these potential themes onto a board, and we got a little bit of a kind of collage of different themes that folks are really interested in and would like to see in their future Gateway Park. And then lastly, we asked folks to indicate what things that they would love and transform. Green dots indicated parts of the park that they loved, and then the pink ones indicated parts of the park that they would transform. And what I really enjoyed about having this exercise is showing people, when they were thinking about the future of Gateway Park, they weren't just thinking within the confines of what the park is itself, but also the surrounding context as well. How do people get to the park? You can see there's a heavy cluster of green at that northeast corner, where the Custis turns into Mount Vernon, and it's kind of the predominant way for folks to get from Roslyn onto the Mount Vernon Trail. It is not considered a safe intersection for people to get to, and people would like to see that changed. So that really framed the conversation that we had throughout this process as well, is that we can't just think about this as, all right, what can we do in the park in order to make this something more attractive for people to go to, but how can we make this safer for folks to get to as well? This played really heavily into our consideration. So we took a lot of what was said here at this first engagement level and let that dictate what we were going to do for the second engagement. Very similarly, we had about 700 participants in the second engagement as well. And during that second engagement, we developed 3 very distinct conceptual designs for the park. The Potomac Stitch, the Roslyn Ramble, and the Gateway Commons, each one kind of treating the park differently, both in amenities, but also in the crossing over North Fort Myers Drive. We heard what people were saying, that access to the park is not ideal. It is not really pedestrian friendly at all times. And even though the long range plan for Roslyn, the Realized Roslyn Sector Plan, called for the removal of these concrete superstructures, including the pedestrian crossings, we really wanted to show the community that we were hearing what they were saying, and we wanted to weigh different options as far as what this future park could look like. So the Potomac Stitch didn't have any crossing over Fort Myers Drive, and really used that space to add in more amenities. This was the concept that had the largest dog runs, cumulative space well over 10,000 square feet, more than what exists today at the dog park. It included multi-use sports courts, direct circulation, kind of north, south, and east and west along the park, and then also aligned with the urban grid and focused a little bit more on active uses. The Roslyn Ramble had an adapted bridge, kind of utilizing what already exists over North Fort Myers Drive, and then adding to it a little bit, and then utilizing that kind of verticality. If you've been to the park today, you know that the space where that existing crossing over North Fort Myers Drive is there's a seating area up there. There's a little bit of space for amenities and stuff like that. And so this concept played with the vertical kind of relation between the ground level of the park as well as that upper level as well. Included in this concept was dog bowl, which was about like a 7,000 square feet dog area, more meandering paths and a lot of biophilic organic forms in the space, as well as a woodland forest kind of vibe to it. And then lastly, we had the Gateway Commons. This one had a totally new bridge that crossed over Fort Myer Drive, and played more into the events that are really the dominant use of the park today. There was not just one large lawn area, but two on the western side as well. And then it included a couple of playgrounds for children of different age groups. In the second engagement, we asked folks what they preferred. This wasn't to say that we're just going to choose the Roslyn Ramble because this was the most popular one, but to say that, okay, this is generally where folks are leaning. How can we use this as a foundation for the design for the final concept? We also asked folks to tell us what type of balance they'd like. Next slide, Marco. You're all good. And what we heard is that people want a balance, pretty even balance. Direct circulation, meandering paths, about 50-50. Active use and contemplative use, about 50-50. The dog run versus the play area, maybe a little bit more towards the play area. But a lot of what we were seeing was about 50-50. The ones that did kind of stand out a little bit was that people wanted much more natural plantings versus ornamental plantings, which is pretty par for the course with every engagement we'll ever have in Arlington County. Gardens and walks over lawns and events. And then kind of mirroring that, the everyday use versus the community events. I think this last question that we added onto the balance, we added that on after the in-person open house, because we heard so many people talking about, like, we need a reason to go to the park every day. And so we wanted to capture that kind of numerically in the data as well. In the second engagement, we had folks indicate what their favorite amenities were. And this wasn't to say that, like I said, we're not going to just choose the Roslyn Ramble, but we wanted to choose the different amenities that folks really wanted throughout, that they wanted us to prioritize to put together this kind of conglomeration of a final concept design. The top choices were the woodland walk, the dog run, garden rooms, a canopy walk, and a large flexible lawn area. Those were the most popular. The ones that were the least popular were the hill and having no overhead connector, which really indicated that, okay, yeah, our instincts were right. Pedestrian safety is not great, and we need to have some sort of crossing over North Fort Myer Drive in order to make folks feel safe to come to the park. And that led to this final concept for the third engagement. It included a new bridge, large and small dog areas, totaling over what currently exists today. A pollinator walk that connects different garden rooms together. A woodland play area for both ages 2 to 5 and 5 to 12 as well. Public restrooms and storage, an event pavilion, different social groves where people can kind of hang out in the shade, and bike parking and repair stations throughout the site in order to connect with folks who are using the Custis Trail and the Mount Vernon Trail. For this third engagement, we didn't do any in-person open houses. We did an online engagement only, and then did a couple pop-ups as well to kind of direct folks to the online portion of it. And what we heard was that folks were pretty satisfied with what we've been doing so far. We had 59% of folks indicate that they were satisfied, and 23% that they were unsatisfied. Of the folks who were unsatisfied, a lot of the reasons were that too much space given to the dog areas. Pedestrians don't feel safe, which is something that we've heard throughout the process. The folks felt we weren't going far enough in making it feel pedestrian friendly. And to that point, I think it is really important to highlight that what we're doing is within the bounds of the park. And we wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be stopping there. We are going to continue coordinating with our DES colleagues to make sure that what's happening in the future around Gateway Park is adding to that sense of pedestrian safety and making folks feel like they are able to go to the park comfortably. There were concerns about noise, which is understandable. If anyone's hung out in Gateway Park for more than 15 minutes, probably heard about 3 or 4 planes going over. It's really loud over there. There's also a highway right underneath you. So those are some things that we heard as well. And then they wanted a lot more trees and nature to be emphasized in the park. They also some concerns about safety, and then reimagining the children's play areas were other concerns that came up as well. And then lastly, we asked, does this final draft concept find an appropriate balance between the everyday use and the community events? The average was about 43, meaning just so slightly leaned towards, they felt that it was too much towards the community event still. But we feel as if we reached a pretty good balance, and 7 points off of the median, I think, is an indicator that we were pretty close to hitting it. And that takes us to where we are today. We are at the park master plan phase of the process. We have a draft that is currently under review by staff right now, and are planning to take this to the county board in December. But we wanted to make sure that some of these things that were highlighted in the park master plan, we took to you all as well at the Park and Recreation Commission. One thing that we heard, we've already gone to the Pedestrian Advisory Council last month. And one thing that they mentioned is that they, so as, could you draw a line from the top left corner or over the bridge, kind of following the swooshy path?
Oh, this right here.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So if you go over the bridge there, you would get dumped off in kind of the south western corner of the eastern side. What we heard is that folks, if we could consider adding stairs to the northeastern corner, where the pink circle is, as an option to be a little bit more direct towards the Mount Vernon Trail. And so we're currently going through a study to look at, you can go to the next slide, Marco, at different options for what those stairs could look like, in order to kind of reintegrate into the site a little bit. Another thing that we heard in some of this early feedback from the final concept is the garden rooms feel a little bit tight and enclosed. And rooms. Yeah. So instead of having smaller rooms, we're looking at a potential of having these larger rooms instead. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be taking away some of the amenities that would be going into these spaces, but they'd be a little bit more divided within the kind of kidney beans areas themselves, where there was a room dedicated to fitness, a room dedicated to like outdoor working or something like that. Maybe we can kind of incorporate examples of those amenities within the space. And then also wanted to take a look at some of the stuff in the design guidelines. We are looking at the canopy coverage for the site. As it exists today, I think we're around like 20-25% for canopy coverage, and we are targeting well over 40%, which is the minimum as required in the new Forestry and Natural Resources Plan. We're even targeting some of the larger, more mature trees in the northeastern corner of the site to maintain, knock on wood. Hopefully we're able to do that. The other thing that we're looking at is understory planting. We want the understory planting to really tell kind of like a regional story of the park, and that not one space is going to be kind of 100% one thing, but that we are kind of like jumping from different kind of ecotypes. That's the word that it's, yeah, different ecotypes as we kind of walk through the park, going from like the Potomac Gorge type areas, the pollinator meadows, to more of a bedrock terrace, and then the social groves, which focus more on like the native trees, a flexible lawn, and then looking at the streetscape as well. And then we are also considering heavily the impervious surfaces throughout the site. As it exists today, the pervious to impervious surface is about 72,000 to 89,000. 72,000 is pervious to 89,000 impervious. And the proposal kind of flips that on its head. About 87,000 square feet would be pervious where we're at today, and then 70,000 square feet would be impervious.
Also, I just wanted to keep in mind that that hatched area is all tunnel underneath it is all considered
impervious, because you're not going, even though it might be looking green, nice up top. For these calculations, it's considered impervious because it's just going to hit the tunnel, not infiltrate.
So there's less square footage in the new than the old?
I think part of that is because we're adding more streetscape, which, yeah, that's a good question. We're missing about 4,000 square feet. We'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, that's a good question. We have Justin on who might be able to answer that. But
Yeah, Max, that's because of the lane configuration on Fort Myer Drive.
thank you for that. Okay. And then last thing we looked at with the design guidelines is kind of like a lighting sample of what this space would look like at night as well. We have different lighting typologies or types throughout the site. We have the kind of county street lights that would frame the park, and then more primary pedestrian path style lights throughout the pathways, area lights strategically placed throughout the park, secondary kind of smaller lights through the pollinator walk adjacent to the garden rooms, and then lastly linear lights that would span the length of the bridge as well. And with that, we're at the kind of point where you guys are welcome to ask us questions. We are going to commissions right now. Right now, obviously, we're at the Park and Recreation Commission. We're planning on going to the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission next Thursday, and looking at county board adoption at this point in December. But yeah, we're available to answer any questions. Obviously, Jeremy and myself are here, and then we have Justin from Field Operations, whose work has been designing this really beautiful.
Great, thank you for that great presentation.
Joe, before you begin, I wanted to just address something that I didn't address at the beginning of the meeting. So since we do not have meeting quorum, unfortunately, those attending online where commissioners can't participate in the discussion. So they can log on, they can hear the discussion, but they cannot participate as part of this in-person environment, which unfortunately that is the case.
All right. That's unfortunate, but if anybody has something they need to say, they're welcome to text it to me and I'll voice it.
And
We've dealt with this issue before, unfortunately, but yeah, that's
My text.
unfortunately that's what it is.
And also, I'm
703-477-99.
also happy to answer questions if folks have them beyond the scope of this meeting. My email is on the project page, but mewart@arlingtonva.us. I can put it in the chat as well.
Okay, but we've had Gary and Adriana have been following this very closely. So Gary, I'd like to have you moderate this discussion.
All right. First, thank you for the incredible effort that your team made in soliciting public input on this. And I'm not sure if I've seen project work, but they did a better job than what you guys have here. And I really appreciate you modifying the design concepts along the way based on feedback that you received. And I noticed that in this last go around, your modifications seem to be based on those requests for change that were supported the most by the public. So that was, I think, a very good approach to take. So I have a number of questions here. I guess the first one is the public was most in favor of the Roslyn Ramble approach. And compared to the amount of biophilia and tree canopy coverage in the original Roslyn Ramble, that compared to what you have in this final design, how do the two match up?
That's a good question. Justin, do you have that information on hand? And if not, we can follow up with you on that.
I can find it. I know we are close. So we are within kind of a reasonable quantity of canopy coverage between the two, but we can keep discussing and answering questions as I pull up that statistic, because I do have that.
Okay, yeah, and if you can't find it out, you can send it to us.
Great question, though.
The next question I have is whether a water feature for birds was considered.
Yeah, so water feature is something that came up a lot throughout the process, and unfortunately, it's just not something that's super viable at the site right now. As what exists today, we have several fountains at the park that are defunct. They don't work. And the reason for that is because there's the traffic underneath the park on I-66 creates such like consistent and violent vibrations that the infrastructure just doesn't work. It's required constant maintenance. And I think in like the 90s, they decided to just not worth it. And so that's why we're kind of where we are today with the former fountains. I think even when the park first opened, it was like there was like the concrete wall of the fountain itself, but it just doesn't work.
Okay, well,
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we're not gonna like we're still considering obviously water-based infrastructure for the park in order to have bathrooms and drinking fountains and stuff like that. But we just don't have the capacity to do larger ones, water features for birds and stuff.
Another question, and you mentioned in your presentation that this goes to retaining existing trees. I understand you try to retain everything you can, which is not going to be so adversely impacted by the construction that it's not going to be a viable environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the case. And then also, I think we're including this in the plan, so I think we can say it out loud. We're also going to try, where possible, to kind of, and Justin, if I'm using the wrong nomenclature, correct me, recycle existing trees on site as well, and ways that we can, ones that are large enough to create planks out of. We'll use those on site as the for part of the construction materials for the park. It's a goal. If it is a process that is a little bit more expensive than otherwise doing it, to use it, to recycle it on site. But we are going to try and do that.
The other thing we learned is that a lot of the trees that were planted here in the 80s, they didn't really know much about soil science, soil volumes and things above these tunnels. So a lot of them have died over time. Things just, they sort of hit their life limit of 20, 25 years and died. So there's a lot of like stumps out there, I feel like. So the things that have survived, there's a lot of like small little crepe myrtles and things like that that are probably not worth preserving. You know, when we can now go and give a healthy spot for trees that will last, you know, hopefully 40, 50 years kind of thing, with, you know, better soils and, you know, more soils for them to grow. So, yeah.
Okay.
Best time to have planted trees
Yeah.
40 years ago, but when you did it, you should have had good soils. They didn't put out either. Right, yeah. But there are some, especially in the northeast corner, that have some, they're good sized canopy, and we should be able to see.
Yeah, I think there's one sycamore.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll add to Jeremy and Max's are both great answers is just evaluating the species that exist on site. You know, that was a big consideration, and you know, we have a goal to really use natives or regionally adapted native plants. And so some of the smaller trees that Jeremy mentioned, like crepe myrtles, don't hold the same value, ecological value, that the American sycamores do in the Northeast.
Yeah, yeah, crepe myrtles, although they're beautiful, they don't really provide much benefit to our native wildlife.
Exactly.
So, you know, there are other understory type trees like that that are native that do provide that benefit. And in that respect, it would be great if at the point this project progresses where you're choosing species of trees and other plants, herbaceous plants, for example, if you wouldn't mind sharing that list with the commission, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to do that. And I did track down that statistic. So the Rosalind Ramble during the engagement too, we were showing right around 64% canopy coverage, or no, excuse me, 55% canopy coverage.
Okay.
And then with the new design, we are right around 46. So we did drop below what the Rosalind Ramble had been showing. We're still over the goal of 40%. We also have 100% native plants being proposed as part of that.
Okay. One of the commissioners was not able to make it tonight, was wondering whether the reduction in tree canopy might have been influenced by a safety concern. I think some of the public comments you received expressed concerns about areas that would not be particularly visible, and they indicated that they might feel unsafe walking through some of the areas. So I don't know if that played a part in your decision to reduce the canopy or whether other factors that resulted in the reduction.
Yeah. it
Oh,
definitely-
yeah, go ahead, Max.
No, you- all you?
No, you hit the nail on the head. As much as people love the Rosalind Ramble and the biophilia and the nature that that plan really evoked, safety was the kind of biggest con from the community, and there were concerns about sightlines and maintaining a safe environment. So you do see that in the final concept plan, a reflection of trying to maintain sightlines and balancing that with still a kind of immersive in nature and natural experience.
And speaking of the natural experience, another question that the commissioner had was whether the playground equipment would primarily be made out of natural materials. I don't know whether you can.
It looks like it.
Yeah, looked like it to me too, but I just want to confirm.
Yeah, at this point, it's sort of conceptual in nature, but we are showing very much natural wood playground features that have come a long way since the old days of natural wood. And we'll be working through that, but the theme is sort of a woodland playground. So yeah, the idea is to keep that. That's one of the pieces you can't make. You can make swing chains out of wood, right? like there's obviously going
Porcelain berry vines. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry for all the questions.
Someday.
Let's see. Will the current design allow you to host the same sort of special public events that you used to? It looked like you'd be able to. Just want to check on
Oh, yeah, for sure. Throughout the entire design process, we kept that in mind, but okay. And not just with special events, but the existing stakeholders in mind, whether they're dog walkers, people doing parkour, or the special events that have happened in the park. We wanted to make sure that those folks were having their voices heard throughout it, and the folks who are dominantly in charge of putting on those events. So we've been coordinating with the bid throughout this process. Rosalind is the church who does a lot of work on a lot of the special events at the site, and we are the final concept is something that can support those types of events, and that's kind of shown. Mark, would you be able to hop to the final concept? And you just pass it. There we go. So number 7 on the screen now is an event pavilion, and that's something that could be used as kind of like cover for a stage. Right now for the Jazz Fest, we bring in temporary stage equipment in order to do that. And we're thinking about putting in a dedicated space for that. That also could double as a shaded kind of space for kids to just run around in as well, when there's not special events going along. And then the lawn area, it's hard to tell in the conceptual design, but the elevation, there's a slight kind of dip. It's like a little bit of a bowl, how it's designed, so that if you're in the back, towards the back of the social grove, you're a little bit higher up than the folks in the front, and it kind of acts as like a sitting stage a little bit, so that folks who are going to watch the show, it allows for vantage points from all angles, where that's something that you kind of get naturally today because the lawns are terraced, so they get up a little bit higher as you go further west. We kind of blend that into the design with the concept, with the final concept that we have here.
And the remainder of my questions deal with funding. And I remember seeing something on the website that suggests that funding is already in place for this.
Yeah, so it's a combination of sources for the funding. There is CIP, Capital Improvement Plan funds that are paying for a good portion of it. There's developer funding that comes from a couple of the adjacent developers as part of the community benefits packages that they agreed to. Folks who are not 100% familiar with it, Arlington County allows for folks to build a little bit beyond what's allowed in the zoning ordinance, but in order to do so, you have to provide some sort of community benefit. Oftentimes that comes in the shape of build a park or donate money, we'll provide funds in order to do a certain project for the county. And so a portion of those funds come from that. And then a big chunk of it comes from the community benefits agreement as part of the View of Washington that the county worked out with the CoStar development team. They were a commercial tenant that wanted to utilize that space for their offices. And so because the View of DC was given as part of that community benefits package for that project, the county board decided that this is what the value of that is and use those funds, about 14 million, I think.
Yeah, it's
Around 14 million, in order to enter into the pool of funds that we could use for the park. And what that's allowing us to do is to construct the park all in one go. Initially, when we started this project, the game plan was to, we're going to do a park master plan. We're going to construct one side of the park, and then we are going to wait for a later date in order to get the funds to construct the second half of the park. And so now with those funds from the CoStar agreement, it allows us to do construction all in one go. So we are going to jump straight from park master plan agreement with the county board into working on the design development phase. That's about a year to a year and a half timeline as well. And then construction right after that. And so hopefully we'll be able to provide the community a brand new park in full within the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's
So this is so basically 2027.
2026 is when we're planning to start construction. I'm not an expert.
And
on
how does that fit
construction
with the
timelines.
boathouse? What would that construction?
So right now, that would still be dependent upon, once we move forward with the master planning effort, which we're thinking about beginning next year. But ideally, it would be prior to when the existing programmatic agreement between NPS and the county expires. So that would be before 2029.
Okay, so it'll predate the boathouse by a couple of
Predated
years.
this, yeah.
Yes.
And the boathouse is obviously on your mind, thinking about these pedestrian things, and that's the subject of the next discussion that we're supposed to have, right, starting right now.
Yeah. Sorry.
But no, we appreciate this. I have, I'm sorry, Gary, did you have?
that was it. Do you know when you're going to be receiving the 14? Sorry. By the way, this commission did testify in support of
Yeah.
that before the county.
We appreciate that. I mean, I don't know how the money works. I think they've already given the county money. Yeah.
That is something we'll probably have to follow up with our management finance folks, just to make sure that we have everything on hand.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it wasn't made up to max.
I I have a question from somebody on asking about past crime and safety issues at night in the park, and also asking me about maintenance costs. Future versus average now.
Yeah, so yeah, safety at night is definitely something that we've heard. It's something that we want to address in this design. That's part of what goes into our kind of thought process when we think about the lighting at night, in order to make sure that it's visible throughout and folks feel comfortable walking through it. What we've heard from the Our Dogs folks is that they go to the temporary dog park at night sometimes, and they would prefer that if it was a little bit more brightly lit. And so, yeah, we want to make sure that we're able to provide them. And then also, yeah, working with the bid, who does a lot of the kind of maintenance and I want to say leasing of the park, but they go on and check out on things in the park sometimes, working with them to make sure that we're kind of up to date on what's going on, making sure folks are able to feel safe and stuff like that. And what was this? Maintenance, yeah. So we are finalizing that right now. I'm working with Lyndall, who's the park area manager, to get a sense of what our estimate for maintenance for this park is. And then also, we've talked about this a little bit vaguely with field operations. They have a recommendation of 2 years of kind of targeted maintenance for the park in order to, for trees specifically. In order to make sure that the trees are able to make it and survive. And so there is going to be a cost associated with that. And we're in the process of figuring out, okay, what role does the county play in that? What role does the bid play in that? And how our fund's going to kind of be figured out in order to make sure that that's able to happen. Because the last thing we want to do is put in a pretty park that is no longer pretty in 5 years. We want to make sure that this is beautiful and useful for years to come.
So it sounds like maintenance is gonna be more expensive under this design.
I think.
I mean, it's gonna be a nicer park though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the maintenance kind of it, or we're waiting to hear back from the park area managers. But I'd imagine that in the first year, typical average per square foot per park. But yeah, I think it's worth it to make that investment in order to.
And the useful life of the little overland.
The pedestrian crossing.
Yeah,
Um,
gonna be
not sure.
40 or 50 years.
Yeah,
Okay,
the existing one is actually still has some decent bones.
okay.
Could have been reused, but it is very heavy, a lot of concrete and things like that. So this one will be a lot lighter and
Certainly more attractive.
more attractive and less nooks and crannies to hide in and things like that too.
Yeah. But you're gonna use on-site concrete, possible to save carbon.
So we are
footprint
talking
issues.
about that, for
Okay.
to recycle the on-site concrete.
Yeah.
In sort of base layers. Can't just mix up the concrete again.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple. The dog parks.
Yeah.
I know those are always a thought. I'm just wondering what caused you to believe that we needed to create 2 dog parks?
Yeah.
I mean, I know there was a consideration, a lot of people wanted it, but it seems to be a lot of space dedicated to the dog park. And just wanted to see what the thinking was behind the need to do 2 parks as opposed to just 1.
Yeah, so we're thinking of this as one dog park that's separated into 2 smaller area or 2 smaller areas in the sum of its parts. Each one is serving different size dogs. So the smaller one in the bottom left-hand corner is a area that serves small dogs, and the larger one is for large dogs. As the park exists today, that's what exists. But I think because of its kind of alignment, it's a circle that's kind of like a portion of the circle is dedicated to small dogs. You don't really get a sense that that's what's happening. And I think because of that as well, it makes it seem like the dog park takes up more space than it actually takes up, at least relative to what it exists today. Right now it's 10,600, can't remember off the top of my head. I think something like 10,600 square feet for the temporary dog run. And these two combined is about 12,200 square feet. So it's about 1,600 square feet more. Isn't that much larger in total area. But I think, again, because of the size of it, because there's a lot of planting areas kind of surrounding it, because there's a larger path that kind of bisects the two areas, it looks like it's taking up more space than it actually is. And you'll also see that we have some plantings within the dog space as well, in order to add a little bit of shade, in order to add a little bit of biodiversity and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, the two is sort of a requirement we put on ourselves for dog parks versus dog runs. And it's just a size of like the little dogs don't get along with big dogs. So you have a separate area where they can. And then, yeah, the recommended size of a dog park in the PSNP is 50,000 square feet.
Yeah.
This is
Significantly smaller.
12,000, right? The minimum size in the PSNP is 10,000, so we're just kind of barely minimum size of a dog park.
And then next question. There seems to be a lot of concrete on the eastern part of the park in the two southern corners. And I'm just wondering why so much concrete in those areas when they could have been used.
Yeah, so we're kind of thinking of those as a little bit like, so on the southeast corner, it's almost a little bit of like an entrance area, part of these social groves, where folks can kind of hang out. There's going to be a higher density of seating in these areas. And then also for events, especially in the southeastern corner, thinking about ways for like food trucks in order to get into the site, in order to kind of support those special events with food and drinks.
Okay.
And that's kind of the thinking for that. Justin, do you have anything to add on that front?
Yeah, I mean, we're also, in addition to just being kind of entry points into the park, we're thinking of them as plazas, as plazas that are planted with trees, with shade trees. And I would just add that I think as part of our refinements, based on some of the comments, this one being one of them, is are there opportunities to reduce the amount of impervious surfaces above and beyond what we are already doing?
And then my last question has to do with the access to the park. At the beginning of your presentation, you pointed out that people were concerned or didn't like the lack of access to the Mount Vernon side. And I noticed there wasn't anything in particular done other than the typical bump out kind of thing. I'm assuming for that access to the northeastern part of it. And you still have, you're replacing the existing span that goes over that way. Was there thought to maybe creating something that was a little bit further down toward the eastern side, maybe going over Fort Myer Drive, where you would have a way to come from the east and from the west to get in there? So kind of like
So like instead of coming from the far west corner.
yeah, that the brain, that there would be like something that would come off like this, so that you can come this way or from the west, and that would, this way you only have to cross one from Mount Vernon Trail, only one way to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, something specific like that didn't come up.
Okay.
A lot of what we were thinking with that crossing over North Langston Boulevard, westbound Langston Boulevard, is that the sector plan calls for the removal of that pedestrian crossing, and we'd like to not do that. And so that was kind of the primary fight that we were kind of going into with this. Is
Wait, which crossing was it?
all
The sector plan called all of
the pedestrian crossings
to go away.
And yeah, and so a lot of what we were doing with this is a little bit of picking and choosing our battles for what we were able to kind of like argue for against what's recommended in the long range plan. in order to kind of accommodate some of what we were hearing as far as pedestrian safety goes. And so what our goal kind of going into this was, let's use the infrastructure that's already on site in order to be as efficient as possible in order to maintain that level of crossing there. We are currently working with who, big department, do everything, who is in charge of I always forget the name of the hotel to the north. If that is not
Marriott?
Marriott, yeah. If that is not removed by the owner by a certain date, the county is going to remove that. And we've been working with them to make sure that when that happens, they do not deconstruct the pedestrian bridge as well. We are planning to use that for the future of this park. And so, yeah, that as far as, yes, it would have been wonderful to have a little bit more of a direct kind of route to accommodate folks who are coming from Mount Vernon, so they don't have to go all the way across the street and then back up the hill, back across the street in order to get to the park without having to cross over Langston Boulevard. But it just wasn't something that was viable during this.
So moving that one passway down further was not
It wasn't.
right. Okay. So wait, so I think you said that you're redoing that, but now you're saying that you're using it?
So
It's, utilizing the existing ramp and stairs to get up and then redoing just the pedestrian.
This is the cross.
Keeping the infrastructure on the north side.
Got it.
Getting up is.
Anybody else?
I have one other question. Getting back to the trees and the soil capacity, is there a significant difference in the amount of soil capacity within the area, within the dotted lines that is just over the tunnel as opposed to what's on the north and the south side of that? Or they
Justin might have a section.
I don't have a section I could pull up, but absolutely, because we have a structure below us. Whereas beyond the tunnel, we have endless amounts of soil down there. But we are maintaining 4 feet of soil as a minimum where we have trees, and in most cases we have more. And with any on-structure project, we still have to balance our load capacity of the tunnel below with what we're doing above. But yeah, soil volume, we're meeting all the urban forestry requirements for tree health and exceeding those in almost all cases.
Is that going to play any role in what, say, species you choose for areas that are above the tunnel versus just off to the sides?
Yeah,
Your canopy versus sub-canopy trees that you want to have there for decades, as opposed to ones who are going to have a shorter lifespan?
yeah, absolutely. And not just the type of tree, the type of root system that tree has. Something like a honey locust with a deep tap root, we don't want that over a bridge or over a tunnel. We want a more surface-based root system, regardless of its size. But yeah, great question, great point.
We're past our time limit. We're 20 minutes past our time limit. So, are there any more questions that are just burning? Do you have something else? I thought your
No,
hand
sorry.
was-
It was answered.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
And again, if folks have questions beyond this, please shoot me an email. MEWART@arlingtonva.us. I'm happy to answer them to the best of my capability. I appreciate it. And I just want to add, I know you're going to be discussing letters at the end of this meeting. If you all would be willing to write a letter in favor, with recommendations, whatever you guys want to do, we would really appreciate that.
Yeah, we're definitely right. I just don't know yet what I'll say because that's Gary's job.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. But
Yeah,
I
but thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much for all the hard work. It's,
Thank you all.
looks like it's gonna be a great project, especially if it makes it easier to get to the phone now. Okay, so, hi Jennifer, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Justin.
I hope
Thanks,
it's
all.
okay with you if we delay you by 5 minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
I think that Marco said at 8:15, and I'm happy to stay the whole way.
Okay. We won't do that, but I don't want to give short shrift to the next topic, which is really important. And you guys might want to stay for this because we're talking about transportation. Which I don't know if it's proper, but in my mind, it does include like pedestrian crosswalks. So that I'll hand it over to Daniel to tee up our discussion on the master transportation plan.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So I teed this up a little bit last meeting, but just to give a refresher, I'm representing our commission on the advisory group that's looking at Arlington's transportation future. Basically the update of our master transportation plan, sort of look at the transportation priorities for the next 20 years or so, because there's a lot of things that we, can bring to the table that the current plan doesn't currently look at. So we want to look at a way to create a plan that's safe, that's equitable, that's reliable and sustainable. Those are some of the key points that they want us to hit when we're thinking about how we want to create a transportation plan that works for everyone. And one of the things that we have been tasked with is coming back to our commissions and just going over a list of 4 questions and just kind of bringing the commission's consensus answers to those questions to our next meeting, which is coming up in, I believe, December 11th is when our next meeting is. So I'm probably just going to dive right in unless anyone has any questions before I jump in. So the first question is, how does the PRC use the existing master transportation plan? That's a pretty open-ended question. If anyone has anything they want to say about that one.
I've been here, I don't think we've,
I'm not aware.
honestly, we've looked at it once. To be honest.
Honestly, yeah, it's a kind of, I mean, I think it comes up when we do these sector plans. We're doing the Langston Boulevard. But I don't recall in what context.
I guess maybe we assume that staff is following it and maybe we should.
Yeah.
If I can jump in, I think one thing
That'd be good.
that we do is, I think from an educational standpoint, especially within the commission, is we try to also invite staff at really critical times when it comes to whether or not there are updates to this plan or, very important projects. I think one that I think this commission reviewed last year that was very significant was related to pedestrian crossing and trail updates along Route 50, I believe it was, Arlington Boulevard. I think that was a discussion that I believe DES staff participated in. Whenever there are discussions related to site plan development, I know this commission provides comments not just on biophilic design, on landscape design, tree canopy, but also on the improvements that are made to sidewalk development, crossings, things like that. So I think those are some of the things that I think this commission does that is related to what the MTP calls for.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely interested in transportation issues. Most of the site plans I've worked on had some comment about, ingress and egress to the streets and how it all intersects. But I don't recall ever actually looking at master transportation.
Maybe we will in the next 20 years.
I think we will, yeah.
Okay, so we're growing. We want to grow in our, I guess, engagement in it, but up to this point we haven't done too much. The next question is, what does the PRC hope that the refreshed transportation plan?
Well, I'd love to see it have more, policies, reflect more policies that are good for the environment. So things about, bike lanes and pedestrians and especially address this, this mid-range vehicle called the electric bike, the electric scooter, or the moped is what we used to call it when I was a kid. That mid-range vehicle, I think, could really do a lot to help the environment, but it's neither a bicycle nor a car. And I think it's gotten to a kind of a critical point. So
I second that part. Is figuring out how to get all these different multimodal transportation options to work together and complement each other.
Yeah, good way. Anybody else?
I'm not sure how to word this properly, but see that like the buses have more access to green areas in the way that lots of places that are underserved by metro are served by buses, and they're often lower income areas and served by metro. Therefore, if there's more green space or accessible by buses, that would be really helpful. I don't know if that's worded correctly, if there's a better way.
Wait, green space is accessible by buses?
Yeah, like making it those bus routes have, like, if we're doing the big bus change that I know it's happening.
Like you can't get to a good park?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Like is Great Falls accessible by bus? Are Arlington's natural wonders easily accessible by bus and not just
Gotcha.
somewhere that's not accessible either by metro or bus?
That's a good point. You have to have a car to get to so-called good park.
Anyone else have anything on that?
Well, I mean, this is a hard one because we don't know where it's going to go, but just considering the idea of autonomous vehicles and how that's going to impact, it's in our future. I mean, I know they keep saying, "Oh, it's good," but when it happens, it's going to happen really quickly. It's got like AI, like just it came out, boom, it hit. Same thing's going to happen because once they've solved the problems with those vehicles, there's going to be nothing stopping it, and so we need to consider that in our future transportation planning.
Does it include parking space? Is that part of the?
So they're looking at like all the modes of transportation. So we cars, bikes, metro, buses. So like parking is part of that. Pedestrian access is also part of it. It's kind of like, it's a very wide scale.
Well, to the extent that they're parking, that they're addressing parking, I would love to see either green roofs or solar roofs over ground level parking or underground parking, if that's, we have to choose. I'd like parking to be more environmental friendly. Oh, and I almost forgot. A really important issue that keeps coming up with one that starts with G.
What?
Gulf Branch.
Gulf Branch, okay.
Is impervious surface needs to be reduced to the extent, tolerable to, but there's so much residential streetscape that is pretty much unnecessary, especially in North Arlington. I know for a fact that South Arlington needs more streetscape, but to the extent that it's affecting stormwater and the parks, reducing the size of the streets would help reduce the stormwater runoff.
You mean narrowing
Yes.
streets? Okay.
What streets would you want to narrow?
All the ones around Gulf Branch,
No
because
more
it's
Gulf
flowing
branches.
straight into the stream and just scouring it. And this is completely unnecessary. All those people have driveways.
What major streets is Gulf Branch on again?
Military
Oh,
road.
Military Road. Okay.
So that's just one example. I'm sure there are a lot.
I mean, narrowing streets make them less safe for cyclists.
Well, that's a tension. Yeah. So we want both of those things.
Perfect world, right?
Anything else on that one?
Yeah, I think we covered that one pretty well. The next one, 3 out of 4 here is, what does PRC see as the biggest transportation challenges facing Arlington? Talked a little bit about some of the challenges already. Others come to mind.
So that
Sure, what does the PRC see as the biggest transportation challenges facing Arlington?
I'd say continued reduction or achieving continued reduction in single family automobile use as the county continues. Something that we've been pretty successful with the last phase of this over the last 20 years as more people come in and as spreads out of the urban corridors that we up to this point have been funneling all that growth into. That's going to. If we can't get a grip on that, it's very hard to achieve any of these other goals that we have.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. And we talked about some challenges with, like you mentioned, the green spaces maybe not being as accessible via buses. And maybe the parking, Joe, like you mentioned, I think it's another challenge that we could look to address. Just even as we're looking to reimagine how we're parking, try to make it more environmentally friendly.
You see the need for it.
Sure.
What about, does anybody else live near school?
Students.
Where-
I'm thinking of parking in the middle of the sidewalk.
That's not a,
Yes.
that's a behavior.
Yes. Well, it's all behavior problems, actually.
So
Right.
schools have a problem with buses, right? Is there a school bus problem? I think that's gonna continue. I mean, to the extent that we can keep kids on buses, I mean, I live down the street from the school and we have lots of people, single family cars, dropping off the kids instead of buses.
It actually gets back to the, like, one of the things that we should include in there. They need to really make sure that they're including the school transportation in the planning.
Good. Good.
Because that's a huge challenge for APS.
Unfortunately, the big bus issue right now is just staffing,
Yeah,
Drivers.
and that's probably not going to be dealt with in the transportation plan.
I don't know.
Not unique to us, all the other neighboring jurisdictions having the same problem for the same reasons.
Does anybody else think traffic is a
I don't know. I
don't know,
go
I don't
on the
drive.
streets.
Like I bike in the streets, but I think at least in my area, even during rush hour, they're fast, but they aren't like blocked up or anything that I see in Boston rather.
What about excessive speed?
Well, yeah, Washington Boulevard is rough. Fairfax.
To cut through neighborhoods between major thoroughfares. I mean, Columbia Pike is a mess with traffic that we could probably bring up some portion of it or another. I mean, these finish with one, you start another one. So it's just it's no end.
It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, it's I've ever seen it.
Maintenance
not-
So maybe like additional traffic calming measures. I mean, there's only so much you can do, but speed bumps.
More circles.
Well, that actually.
People need to get used to the circles.
Oh, yeah.
Because there is bump outs and whatnot that you can use to add to stormwater reduction while also slowing traffic.
That would help.
But traffic circles over.
Tell you about my neighborhoods. Over the traffic circle, that's new. Right, any more?
So one last question. What does the PRC see as opportunities for transportation?
Opportunities. Well, I think that what was your word, multimodal? I mean, I really think these motorized bikes and scooters are gonna transform the use of cars. If, once they get to be, if we can get them to be safe. I think a lot of people who don't want to use them now start to use them.
Another opportunity, going back to what I was saying before about the automated vehicle lot. I mean, I think we should try to become a place like Tempe, Arizona, or San Francisco, where they're using autonomous vehicles. We should we want to be a tech mecca. We should be willing to I want to say be a guinea pig, because there currently are guinea pigs. We're the hamster of the autonomous vehicle. We're a little more farther along, but I think we should try to become a place where those vehicles can find a home, so to speak.
It's a good idea, we could be like a regional leader in this.
By the way, it's really freaky getting one of those cars. I did it in Tempe, Arizona, but I got used to it soon enough. This is when I was sitting in the front and there's nobody next to you.
You're on the passenger side?
Yeah, I was in the front passenger seat. But you kind of get used to it after a little bit, but the first time or two, it's really freaky. Yeah.
Huh. I wouldn't do that. I admire you. But what about, you're talking about being a regional leader. What about the challenges of linking Arlington, the fact that Arlington is, people from everywhere else have to come through Arlington to get to DC or to get to the outer lands? Is there any potential there for anything to happen?
Good question. Or like seen more as, or as less just a thoroughfare for people to come through and move to the city.
That what I-66 is? 95?
And
No,
50.
make them stop. Give them a reason to stop in Arlington.
So-
Not sure what reason to stop, but I don't know, just thinking about that. I mean, we're not in isolation here. We're in the middle of, major traffic thoroughfare. So what does that pose?
I think for a lot of people, it's the opposite. We want them to stay on 395.
Don't.
And not come over all of our neighborhoods. So not contribute to all that.
Pass on through.
Exactly.
All right, well.
I've got good notes here, so.
Okay, good.
I'm gonna plan to write these up. I'm gonna send them out probably tomorrow to the group, just to get final feedback, especially from folks who aren't here.
Okay.
And then I'll send the answers to our staff contacts by the 19th. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for serving on that. I think it's
It's a lot of
really
fun.
important. And I'm very interested to get more informed about the master transportation plan. Okay, so moving on, Jennifer, I'd like to welcome you to the table. Jennifer, if you're ready, everybody. She is the new Assistant County Manager for Climate Policy. And we're so excited to have her here to tell us about her new position and how she's going to solve so many problems.
Wow,
No pressure.
that's
no
quite the
pressure.
introduction.
No pressure.
Actually, or I can come up this way. It's quite all right, actually.
You got one of those chairs.
Yeah, I don't want to have to everybody, so. How about that? Well, thank you for having me this evening. It's nice to be back. I know some of you may know me, my former role as the DPR Deputy Director. I was did that for about 10 years, but sort of just quickly stepping back. I have been with the county for 21 years and time has flown by. I never thought I would make it this long. I was like, oh, for sure. I started my journey. I actually did some work in Central America, doing some land use planning, and thought, because I have an international development background, planning, and I thought for sure I would be there for the rest of my life, right? And one thing led to another. Unfortunately, I was with my son at the time, and both of us got dengue when we were in El Salvador, and he was hospitalized. And I said, I love what I do, but I think I need to take a break. And I applied to this little known place called Arlington County, and I would like to say the rest is history. I TBD on that, but I truly fell in love with the community. Started my work in the then neighborhood conservation, now known as Arlington neighborhoods, and had this sort of awakening. I was like, wow, we have so much opportunity in this community to do such good. And back then we were talking about, there wasn't even safe routes, right? We were talking about making those connections and creating opportunities for people to walk and bike. And so I was very energized by the opportunity to play a very small role in this incredible community. So I had an opportunity to move on to the Department of Environmental Services, where I did transportation site planning. And I was there for several years, then moved on to regional transportation planning. That's where I passed the bike share policy, which I know you all know and love, or at least I hope. And for context, again, and I feel like I'm dating myself, but that was only maybe 15, 16 years ago when we actually had to justify why biking was not just recreation.
Wow.
That's how, I mean, it doesn't feel like, it feels like, of course, biking is transportation as well, but that's not how it was. That in Arlington, of course, we certainly were ahead of the curve, but there was definitely some work that had to be done, explaining why bike share has value, why it belongs as part of our right of way. So, and I also managed the CIP for transportation, was involved in the last master transportation plan update. That's how old I am. And other activities. I also, as the regional transportation planning manager, realized pretty early on how the importance of our regional work, right? And this certainly is true from a climate perspective. But that's where I saw how working with our sort of the larger DMV, but certainly the Northern Virginia region, together we're much more powerful in terms of our advocacy and our ability to move state legislation, et cetera. So then I was like, well, time for a new opportunity. And I moved over to Department of Parks and Recreation, where I mentioned I spent about 10 years there. And I loved every second of my time in DPR. I oversaw the administrative functions for the department, but also the environmental side. I oversaw the Forestry and Natural Resource Plan update. I know you all are very familiar with that. It just came out last year. Passed the Biophilic Cities policy as examples. And I worked with some incredible colleagues, and it was sort of nice to come back and get back into it. Although I haven't been out of DPR for very long, I certainly have a fondness and a special place for the department in my heart. And so that brings me to this current role. Assistant County Manager for Climate Policy. And my job is to oversee very specifically the Climate Policy Office, number one. The Climate Policy Office includes the Director of Climate Policy, Rich Dooley, who also is a long-term, he's been with the county for 19 years and spent time in community planning, housing and development, doing planning, and then most recently in the Department of Environmental Services on the energy side. So there's the two of us, and then we also have 2 FTEs that we need to fill, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have them down the road, but as part of this conversation, but we've been very sort of thoughtful and measured in our approach to filling those, primarily because we want to hear from commissions, committees, stakeholders in the community. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing as it relates to climate change? I think I'm sure there are many thoughts on that subject. And we want to make sure that we hear them so that we can design those 2 additional staff positions so that we can help support the county's efforts to address climate change. So that's my role, is one, to oversee that climate policy office, but big picture. The county manager at the direction of the board and in conversation with a variety of different stakeholders, saw the real importance of creating this office. And he had created actually this position, my position, in a slightly different way a couple of years ago, with the primary focus, which has not changed, which is to help coordinate and support the county's efforts to implement its climate action goals, period. And it's a lot of work, and we have a very, very steep hill to climb, and I do not have to, explain that to you all. I know you know it very well. And so bringing this position and now the expanded office is a way of helping to bring all of the different activities and efforts that are happening throughout the county together and try to maximize and leverage the resources that we have to make the greatest impact as possible. And so he, just stepping back, so Mark created my position, and that was filled by Bill Egger, who moved on to our Department of Emergency Management. He's since left the county, and after he transitioned, the county manager said, "Okay, all right, so we have this position. We're seeing even more need to bring on resources to help us in this effort," and that's where he created the position for that Rich Dooley's now sits in, and then the 2 additional FTEs. In addition, I also report directly to him, whereas the previous position did not report it to the deputy county manager. So wanted to elevate the position, change the title to assistant county manager, and all of which is just important. Particularly, I know you all follow how we operate in the county. Certainly having a position that reports to the county manager gives the office the ability to reach across the departments and pull groups together and have those difficult conversations and help facilitate them. And that's primarily one of the big pieces of our job, is to sort of break down those silos, get everybody talking, so that we can continue to move forward. So I know that was a lot, but I want to talk a little bit about the sort of big picture of the Climate Policy Office. So what are we tasked with doing? I talked a little bit about my role, my responsibility, but the best way I can explain it is if you look at the office in 4 different buckets. So the first, which I talked a little bit about, was being a champion. So my role, Rich Dooley's role, and that of the 2 members who will eventually join us, will be to support and help develop the county's climate action goals, period, right? Our job will be to gather the data, the research, help bring in new voices, engage the community to create informed or to give the board data that can enable them to make informed decisions about climate policy. So champion being one. As part of being a champion, we also serve as a central resource for both constituents and staff to better understand the interconnections between various climate policies. We also help support the board in their work on regional commissions and committees. So that's the champion piece. And then also, actually, I missed one, which is our focus is really around centering climate policy on equity. We recognize that climate change affects us all, but it does not affect us equally. And so we need to ensure that we have that lens as we are looking at transitioning and ensuring that there is a just transition, that we're bringing people up, that we're giving folks opportunities and not leaving them behind. And so that's our champion focus. Then our next sort of focus is around our commitment. So this really gets to the meat and potatoes of our policy work. And I want to acknowledge that while we are certainly in charge of developing or helping to develop climate policy, it doesn't mean that we're the only ones who are doing it, right? That happens throughout the entire county. And so from that respect, we're looking to help coordinate and prioritize the policies that are moving forward throughout the county. So, so commitment and champion, those are two primaries, and the following two are communications and engagement. So a big piece of this, and I already mentioned it, is having an active dialogue with members of the community, residents, businesses, and ensuring that we are understanding what the needs are so that we can be responsive to them through our policy. So what are our barriers to climate action? So having those important dialogues will help us to move forward. And particularly when we live in a dense community, it's all the more reason to be reaching out, particularly to those who may be the voices that we don't normally hear from, to understand what their barriers are, what their challenges are as it relates to climate change, and incorporating their voices into our action. And then the next section is, it's also a fairly large one, which is coordination and collaboration. And this, I look at this in sort of two pieces. The first is our internal coordination collaboration. So I talked about breaking down barriers and silos. And so we see a big piece of what we're going to do, not only in helping to bring folks together to facilitate conversations about how to move the county forward on climate policy, but also climate literacy. Climate literacy inside the county. It's not that that all of us are unfamiliar with climate change and maybe the steps needed to move forward. It's more about how do we focus our energy in the areas that are going to have the greatest impact, and we need to learn. And then as science, we get new technology coming out all the time. Our job is to synthesize that information and help share that with our staff so that they can make the most informed decisions as they implement board policy. So internal collaboration, coordination, very important. And then externally, same thing, slightly different. Climate literacy for sure. I will tell you that no matter how much communicating we are doing now, it is not enough. And it can't just be the government who's doing it. And not to mention that not everyone wants to hear government talk about climate change, right? So our job is to not only push information out and help inspire action by residents and businesses, but also, and our visitors, but also to coordinate and connect and partner with organizations like Eco Action Arlington, for example, Sierra Club, Faith-Based Alliance, partner with groups that are already mission driven, and maybe find others who have yet to sort of come to the fore and engage them in new ways to reach our community, our residents, businesses, visitors, to help inspire action. And so helping to educate the community, helping to communicate, creating partnerships, and then also working with our existing partners, right? Our the regional localities, state, federal government, to the extent that we're able to not only find ways to work together, but also to potentially bring resources to the county to enable us to get our work done. So that's a fair amount of work that we need to do in these different buckets. And I acknowledge that, and there's no other way around it, right? This is the amount we are going to have to lean into this work, and our job is to help that county lean in and help support other organizations do the same thing. Because if we're not working in the same direction, we are going to have a very hard time reaching the county's goal, which is carbon neutral by 2050. And I know we've got COP29 happening. I know that IPCC is going to be putting out their next report, I think, in January. So we'll see what the science says, what, where the direction is. I know that from all of the materials that we're reading, even though Arlington is one small piece of the puzzle, it all matters. And all of this, like all the action that we take matters. And the longer it takes for us to act, the harder it is for us to get to carbon neutrality as a community, as a country, as an entire planet, by 2050. So we're in, and I know you know this, but we are in sort of the moments that matter. And I can think of no other job that I would rather do than help support our quality of life and that of our future. So, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So a couple, one is more people going to be enough to do all this?
No.
And some of the positions, but I am curious as in, with all this you're responsible for, how come the county hasn't put more than 2 other FTEs on it? And then, do you know what other counties around the country are doing? Are they creating positions like yours? Do you have other people you can union with to help figure out what they're doing to help you in your job?
I have answers to both.
Yeah.
So the first is that the county already has a good structure for addressing or moving forward with its climate goals. So within the Department of Environmental Services, there is a group that's headed by Demetra McBride. It's the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management. So she oversees the stormwater section and then also something called AIR.
Called AIR.
No. It's the unit's called AIR, and they were responsible for creating the very first community energy plan back in 2012, and then updating it in 2019. So this group in particular has been doing yeoman's work, pushing the counties, particularly their energy policy forward and implementing a variety of different actions. So that's one. 2 is you have your you've got your transportation team, and they are doing through the transportation plan a fair amount of climate related policies, just the transportation focus. Same thing on the solid waste, like in solid waste, they passed a zero waste management plan. And then you look at parks and recreation, we have the forestry and natural resource plan. And to note, while all of these comp plan elements that I just listed have elements of climate policy, it's not 100% climate policy, but you have it happening in all of these different departments through these variety of different comp plan elements. So our job, and I didn't list all of them, I'm happy to, but and our job in the Climate Policy Office is to ensure that we're all harmonized, like these plans are harmonized. We're finding ways to work together more efficiently to accomplish all of these multiple goals, and then also to bring forward, like I mentioned, the climate, education. What are the latest trends? How do we incorporate that in our work? So that's an answer to your first question. And then in terms of what's happening across the country, positions like mine are becoming more commonplace at the local level, like local governments, and then also corporations that are mission driven have similar, let's see, chief of sustainability, for example. They call it different things,
Sure.
But the idea being that they're trying to reduce their emissions. Nestle, headquartered here in Arlington, has a huge sustainability division. And in fact, they are a leader in the food industry for reducing emissions. And so I find comfort in knowing that we have some, I mean, Amazon, right? There are fairly large, we have 2 renewable energy companies nationwide, Energix and AES, that are headquartered here in Arlington, and they have very similar structures.
Okay.
So it's local governments and also private sector. And just one, you didn't ask, but I'm going to add a little piece, which is going back to my point about regionalism. So this is a team sport here, and we are not in the business of keeping secrets in terms of like the new plans that we're going to be putting forward in order to help us move towards our 2050 carbon neutrality goal. And so with that in mind, I speak to my similar position in Montgomery County every 2 weeks, actually. I do the same with Fairfax, Alexandria City. We're working it out. DC is a little different because it's just enormous. So we're figuring out how we're going to navigate that one. And then moving out to other jurisdictions. And the idea is that we are talking regularly, sharing information, and hopefully as part of that process, we might find opportunities to work together to maybe not spend, we can leverage each other's sort of resources because we all have limited staff, right?
Sure.
So that is part of the piece and the effort there.
But the Metropolitan Council of Governments has a climate office too.
They do. They have a committee that was actually started by Jay Facette called CEPC. I don't think I could give you what the acronym stands for at the moment.
Climate change, probably.
Yeah, it's CE.
And that's okay.
And so yes, they do. They have, and we sit on that committee. There are NBRC has a similar sort of sustainability committee. So we're engaged at those different regional levels to share information and learn and hopefully find opportunities to work together. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, go ahead. No, you go.
Could you give us some specific examples of some of the projects you've done recently?
So we are working on our work plan. The Climate Policy Office is. And so we are hoping to be able to release that work plan in the coming months. I mentioned previously that I've been meeting with different stakeholders, trying to understand sort of what the challenges are, what are the opportunities the county should be looking at. And so once we've sort of completed that work, we'll release our work plan. I will say that one of the items on our work plan is to update the community energy plan, which will likely begin sometime in 2025. So that is front of mind for us. And of course, that would be cross-departmental. It's just that we would be the ones to help shepherd that process forward. So I can't give you juicy nuggets yet, but soon, soon.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there anything expected to be on the plan about how parks interact with stormwater?
In the plan, we are going to look at, and the community energy plan talks about this to some degree, but our goal is to zoom out for the next plan update and look at climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And so under each of those buckets, parks and stormwater intersect in different ways, right? And so while I can't speak specifically to what that might look like, I fully expect that we're going to be looking at ways for us to become a more resilient community. What are the policies that we need to put in place? And what might that look like? And I think we can only answer that through engagement with the community. to get a better sense of what direction they'd like us to sort of lean into. Gary, okay, if I can go back, there is one thing that I can talk about that the Climate Policy Office did, but we didn't do it alone. Just wanted to make sure to clarify. I think like the second week that we were, both Rich and I were on the job, we realized pretty quickly that there was one piece of policy action that we needed to take in coordination with Department of Environmental Services to help businesses utilize, it's a financial tool so that they can invest in energy improvements in their building. And and it's called the policy that the county has adopted. It's an ordinance. It's called the CPACE ordinance. And it is essentially a mechanism authorized by the state to enable capital providers to loan money at less than market interest rates for like mezzanine debt in order to put in place energy efficiency improvements in their buildings. And if you're following the news, you'll see that a lot of the barriers for commercial property owners to electrifying their building is just money, right? It's cheaper to go with fossil fuel heating, right, as an example, or not necessarily to have Energy Star appliances if it's a multifamily. And this is a tool by which they can use to fill their capital stack and do it in such a way that it makes it more financially feasible for them to electrify, to not only build their building, but also electrify it in the process. And so we worked pretty quickly, I think over maybe a month and a half, give or take, with the Department of Environmental Services to finalize some updates to this ordinance. And this month, we are going for county board adoption. We moved very quick. Yes. And we actually are skipping over the request to advertise process. That is, there are requirements as to when you need to do a request to advertise. We're skipping over that because we don't need to. And we've done all of our due diligence in terms of stakeholder engagement. And so the goal is to be as nimble and as flexible as possible. And we want to bring this tool forward with the amended tool, because it's been on the books for a while, just hasn't really gotten a lot of uptake, so that hopefully businesses, which we think are hopefully waiting in the wings, can utilize this, and that supports our energy goal. So that is actually a very specific thing that we've done. It's not part of our work plan. It's not something that Climate Policy Office is doing alone, but we did it together. So
Thanks for sharing that
Yeah.
example.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't want to be the wet blanket, but we all know what happened last Tuesday. And I'm sort of curious on how the climate across the river is going to affect what you're doing here. Because it looks like they're going to roll back everything. And that's not good for anybody. But if you're trying to get to a goal by 2050 and your neighboring jurisdictions are just going backward, how are you going to reach the goal?
With grit and determination. I have hope that we will get there. And I think Arlington is uniquely positioned with both our staff expertise, the people that sit around this room, and many others who can help contribute and find creative ways to accomplish our goals. I mean, let's face it, if we as residents of Arlington County made changes to how we live, whether it's a heat pump, whether it's electric appliances, whether it's walking and biking more, right, changed our consumption, it would certainly almost, I mean, and then also on the commercial side as well, if we made significant changes to our own consumption, or just how we sort of do things, we could get very far without having additional government intervention, right? So part of what ultimately we're going to do in the Climate Policy Office, I mentioned communication, is lean into the communication and help to inspire that change. We have no other choice.
If, like as a homeowner, my roof is probably going to be needing to be replaced at some point in the near future. And we were looking at some of the credits, the tax credits that were going to be available. We are expecting now that none of that's going to be available. So is there going to be something that the county or the state of Virginia or is going to attempt to fill that gap?
Well, okay, so one, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know if the rebates that you're referencing, which the state it flows through the state. So we just met with the state today, Virginia Department of Energy, to talk about they're going to be creating a series of mechanisms by which they'll roll out the rebates. They're still talking like those rebates are coming. And so while I don't know what's going to happen, I certainly don't, right? I'd like to plan as the plan will continue to move forward, and hopefully by spring of next year, rebates will be out. And that will help to get folks who are needing to make, weatherization improvements, solar, whatever, how pick from the list. Hopefully we'll get you over the hump and help you to make that decision. Make it easier.
This isn't parks and recreation focused, but I will say that I have found that the county's efforts to help homeowners to make sustainable decisions for their households, whether it's the tree funds or whether it's solar switch we're taking advantage of right now, is enormously helpful, particularly for people who are have a hard time peeking through all of the options, and this becomes an obstacle for people. Solar panels and energy is a big issue because there are so many companies, and there's lots of companies that have a very good reputation. There's a lot of hard salesmanship, and a lot of people just say, no, this is cheap. So county programs like Solar Switch, I find to be enormously helpful in helping you through that tangle of competing against sometimes unscrupulous operators and make that. So those programs, I think, should continue to be supported. And when there are opportunities to expand them, I know the district, for instance, has a very robust program to help homeowners and business owners with putting in green infrastructure to reduce stormwater runoff. So when there are these opportunities, I think it's enormously helpful for people who may know about it and want to do it, but aren't experts and need some help.
We've heard that. Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate you sharing. We've heard that many times over, that sometimes the pathway to sustainability is fraught with too many decisions. It's like you have all the best intentions, and then there's too many options available, or maybe you have just a couple of clarifying questions that you'd like to just pose to someone. So I appreciate that you've shared that these programs are helpful, and I could see us looking into how we can tweak or support or amplify access to those types of programs in the future, particularly in line with the Inflation Reduction Act rebates, which are coming out in hopefully the spring 2025. Yes, I have hope.
So Jennifer, it's getting late. We really hate to hold you later. How can we collaborate and cooperate with your office. Will you be setting out a public engagement for your work plan or climate policy coming up, or what's the deal?
So thank you. So the work plan will be guided by the board ultimately. We haven't talked about how the actual rollout will happen. I presume there'll be some sort of public communication. And it's going to be in fairly sort of big buckets. And so there's an opportunity as we dig into each of those buckets to have further conversations with the commission. So I thank you for asking.
Yeah.
In terms of the update to the community energy plan, it would be like no other, it's similar to forestry and natural resources plan or master transportation plan, where we'll come up with an engagement plan and connect with the commissions accordingly. That one has a little bit longer of a time horizon, but there will likely be pre-work in advance that I can connect with you, Jill, and we can sort of talk through, Marco, of course, what that might look like. So, so thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask just one quick question about the energy, but is there any thought to changing it and not calling it just an energy plan, but calling it a county sustainability plan? We've talked about that here. And
And other places.
yes.
Yes.
Yes. Good.
We're again, part of this is all rolled up in our work plan, but we see that there might be an opportunity to recast the community energy plan to something different, something maybe larger that is more representative of the work that we're doing.
All right. Well, we don't want to keep Jennifer any longer unless there's something absolutely burning. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your work, and keep us informed. And you're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting if you like. But I think right now,
Thank you.
we have Mark. This is your last meeting, and we're really gonna be sad to see you go. We did give you 10 minutes, but we'd all be very grateful if you took less. But if you need 10, it's your last meeting. You've earned it after 6 years. And but before you say anything, I just want to say thank you for your service. You faithfully led the sports, liaisoning, and I think you've been to the sports commission meetings on and off. Maybe not that whole 6 years, but a lot of the time that I.
Yeah, pretty much the whole time. I joined Steve Finn. He was originally the liaison to the sports commission, but he knew that his time was coming to an end, and so I started attending with him, and then continued on.
Well, we just appreciate your input and all your reflections, and so please go ahead and bless us with your.
No pressure.
Well, I was thinking about, back when I got onto this commission, Bill Ross was the chair. And I was recruited by a person at Arlington Public Schools, and that I knew through officiating. And she asked me to join the commission to provide sort of a recreation perspective. And I've tried to do that over the years. I had some specific goals. Unfortunately, I didn't accomplish any of them in the 6 years, and I'm really disappointed about that. I've enjoyed serving on the commission, and I think the commission does really important work. But one of the things that I think that the commission really needs to focus on more. We spend a lot of time looking at site plans and naming parks and talking about biophilia and environmental things and trees, things like that. And I think we've really neglected the recreation side of the commission. And I don't have any history on what the commission did before I got on it, but there is, I think there's a lot of things that this commission could do to focusing on the recreation side. And the sports commission is primarily focused on the sports leagues and those organizations. What this commission could do is focus on not only the recreational use of the park facilities, but the organized recreational use of the park facilities. And that's where I had specific goals when I got on this commission. I really wanted to improve equitable access to county facilities for various constituents in the county. And I never was able to accomplish that goal. And I don't know if there's anybody on this commission now that wants to take up that mantle, but I would hope that somebody would get it and see it as an opportunity. And I mentioned earlier when we were talking about what's going on the other side of the river, there's going to be some things happening that I'm really, really worried about in this county. And I know I've looked at what the board's been saying, county board, and there's going to be opportunities for helping some communities in our county that are really going to need help. And recreation is a great way to keep people on a positive path. And so I think this commission could really put its thumb on the scale and help a lot of people by focusing in those areas. And again, I don't think that all the other work we do with the environmental things and the parks and so forth, I think that's all great work, but I'd like to see the commission, even though I'm not going to be on it anymore, focus on our communities and the people in those communities, and the people that can really make use of. We've got great facilities in this county, and both for organized and casual use. And I just really think that we're going to be entering a time that those facilities should be promoted and provided to the communities that need their help. So
That's very noble, and I appreciate that. That's very, very well said and shared, I think, probably by everybody. So we will do our best. We'll call it the Mark Lincoln legacy to make sure that happens. Thank you very much, Mark.
you're welcome.
All right. We'll sing He's a Jolly Good Fellow at the very end. Okay, so now we've got our last item, which is the letters and things. Gary, you'll be in charge of, you and Andrea will work on writing the letter.
Sure.
And Daniel, you're gonna write up your comments on the master transportation plan.
Yeah, I'll circulate them before I share them.
Remember, yeah, and remember the rule, send it to everybody and then reply to the person who sent it. Claire contacted me. She and Trudy did not receive any comments on the Crystal Block W. So we're gonna go ahead and finalize that, send it in.
Harris Teeter.
And yeah, I think we decided to do that last week.
Yes.
Last month, and I didn't do it. So I'm gonna go ahead and send in the Harris Teeter naming letter that we all agreed, voted. Fortunately, since we don't have a quorum tonight, we voted last time. That's what I'm gonna send that letter in. Gary is gonna testify for the commission at the hearing on Saturday regarding the deer management plan. And there has been hesitate to bring this up now, but you might have been following the National Park Service cut down a bunch of trees along GW Parkway. The county board got involved a little bit, query whether our commission should write a letter to the county board encouraging them to stay involved. Why don't we save that till another discussion when we have more time to talk? There's real no deadline.
I'd like to be involved in that. The Potomac Heritage Trail is where they basically knocked them down. I ran one of my races along there a week ago, and it's just, yes,
It's
terrible.
yeah, devastating.
Yeah.
It's devastating. So, well, I mean, do we have enough to know? Do we want to send a letter to them, to the county board? Not yet. Okay. We'll talk about it when you're more informed. I'll send out some materials from the park steward, who prepared them.
Why'd they cut down the trees?
That's way too long to get into right now.
Construction at GW Park.
Nobody really knows.
But
Yeah.
My understanding is that the Park Service sold it as a way to open up the view lines as part of the goal of the park over the Potomac.
Some people think that was a post hoc rationalization.
But I think that Park Service can be very, so when it comes to their kind of original missions, and I think they perhaps do the parkway as it's used perhaps now, and where the value is now, as opposed to what might have been.
Yeah, suffice to say, you know, as my park steward friend said, the blue ribbon environmental groups, you know, wrote a bunch of letters. All wrote one letter. The news, it was on the news, so they've stopped for now. But it's not going to go away, so we have to. Anyway, but it's not our bailiwick as PRC to write directly to NPS, but we can encourage our board to.
I did want to mention that I sent over an email from CPHD staff about potential participation on the 1320 North Courthouse Road Special Flood Study. That's actually from here, that's to the south of here, where the parking lot is for, I guess, the county building and all of that. I think right now it's currently an office building. There's like a sunken plaza there as well. So that's the area that's going to be considered as part of that special glove study in relation to what was adopted by the courthouse sector plan addendum several years ago. So that's something that we're tracking. So if there's any interest in that effort, let me and Jill and Gary know, and we'll put you down as part of that effort.
Yeah, please consider. Anything else for the good of the order?
And then I think you wanted to mention the green building incentive policy.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Geez, it's been a long meeting. But the green building incentive policy is open for comment until the 17th of November, which I guess is Sunday. But, and then on November 26th, it's going to be discussed at the LRPC. And the green building incentive policy right now requires people, the building owner, to do certain things in order to get increased density or whatever. So they're adding 3 more pathways to getting increased density. Remember 2 of them. One of them is making use of existing materials. So don't tear down the buildings as much as they have been to keep the carbon footprint smaller. One is to convert to housing, commercial office buildings to housing. So they would give increased density for that. And I forgot the third one. But, you know, it's not really in our lane.
But are we talking about buildings in like the Crystal City National Landing
We're
area?
talking about the whole county's policy. Yeah, for green building incentives.
Because my
Which is a little bit outside of our.
my daughter's a VCU and she's living in a building that used to be owned by Virginia Power, and that he converted it to residential, and that it's amazing. I mean, they did
Is it working out okay?
yeah.
Well, they didn't get their incentive yet because the policy hasn't been adopted.
No, but it's a, you know, what they did with the building, because it's a really old industrial building, and they turned it into really interesting. The only goofy thing is you can't open the windows. They're like these kind of windows. They don't, they're sealed shut, yeah. Other than that.
All right. Well, before we close, join me in saying hip hip hooray for. Thank you. Okay. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, awesome.
Thank you everyone online as well.
And thanks everybody online.
Get a dent here. It's a good question. I don't know if it happened.
I had a question. You mentioned you went into a couple of self-driving cars.